Travel back in time to the 80s, reliving the advice,
Carpe diem. Seize the day.
the comebacks,
Why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer.
and the technology.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
Because just like you, we're stuck in the 80s.
Can you say stuck in the 80s?
Hey, welcome to Stuck in the 80s. It's Spearsy here.
And Brad in LA most of the time.
And today we look back at Duran Duran's Rio album and talk to music writer Annie Zaleski, who has a new book out on the classic record.
I mean, it doesn't just feel out there. I mean, it feels out there.
You know what else would be really out there? You becoming a patron of us. That's because Stuck in the 80s is now listener supported through Patreon. Get swag, happy hour invites, and glorious amounts of sucking up from me and Spearsy by joining us at patreon.com/stuckinthe80s podcast. Have I told you how good you look in that shirt? Oh,
Your clothes. Give them to me. Now.
80s Nation, it's your old pal Spearsy. Why do I sound so happy today?
Drugs.
Oh, that's right. It's because I had that long-awaited chat with music writer Annie Zaleski, who just released her latest book on the 33 1/3 label. It's titled just simply Duran Duran Rio. Now, if you read a lot of music journalism, you've read Annie's work. She's written for Salon, Rolling Stone, Billboard, LA Times, NPR Music, AV Club, you name it.
you two sounded like old friends. You were getting along famously.
Well, we have some mutual friends for sure, but this is the first time we've chatted live. We talk about her new book, how she first got into the band. She's younger than us, Brad. So,
What?
But she still loves the 80s.
I love it. I love it.
She'll talk about the surprises she learned along the way while researching the book. And she'll talk about her thoughts about the band's new single, Invisible.
Speaking of 33 1/3, this is a really cool series of books. I don't know if you gentle listeners are familiar with it, but they're small, they tend to be small form factor books, but they go on a very deep dive on a specific album. And the writers will go, talk to anybody who had anything to do with it and just glean all this information. I was surprised, the one or two that I've read, was surprised at how much I didn't know that they were able to unearth about my favorite records. So it's worth a look.
I apologize in advance for the noise behind me. I don't know if it's being picked up on the mic or not. I'm in New York today, and it sounds like the Pillsbury Doughboy is 2 blocks behind me and taking down a building right now as we speak.
Construction goes late in the Big Apple.
Oh my God. It's never ending here. You're actually in New York too.
Yeah, that's why I didn't just say Brad in LA. I am in New York on business this week.
Here's what's really weird. Brad and I are probably 4 miles away from each other right now. I would guess, maybe, give or take. And we're still recording the podcast remotely.
We have issues.
But we're going to set those aside. And we want you to just sit back and enjoy this fun conversation about Duran Duran with music writer Annie Zaleski.
Those words are all remainders, echoes growing in the heart of twilight.
Hey, Annie, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good. Sorry, I was playing Duran Duran. I was trying to remember why I liked Seven and the Ragged Tiger so much. And so I was going through it, and then I remembered it's because of the song The Seventh Stranger. So
I love that song so much. It's so good. Yeah, I just I don't know if you saw, but our one of our college stations here is doing a Duran Duran marathon on Thursday. 18 hours of Duran Duran. So I know the guy putting it together. So I'm like, let me curate an hour. So I over an hour. So I basically curated a list, and that's on there.
Oh my God, I would love to see that list. What are some of the more unusual picks?
Secret October, which I think is a favorite of, B-side. It's a favorite. Let me pull it up here. I actually have a couple songs from Bedazzleland because I love Medazzaland. I'm a big fan. So I have a couple songs from there. I have Hold Me from Notorious. That's one of my favorite, for whatever reason, that's been a favorite of mine for decades now. I love that song. So I have that one. So that's some of the weirder ones. Maybe I tried to do a little bit like, not necessarily like the hits per se. So I put together a list that like flows together as as kind of a playlist. And then also like with, has a little bit of diversity.
After we did an interview one year with Andy, after his book came out, we talked to him, and I think we were on the phone with him for an hour, and we curated a list for the podcast of some of the better songs of the non-80s years. I remember falling in love with songs like My Antarctica All Over Again and stuff like that.
Yeah, obviously there's just so much in their catalog in terms of, that you can kind of dig into. That's been one of the nicest things actually doing press for the book, is that I've really, delved into like things I hadn't listened to in a while. It's been really gratifying.
What's been strange for me is listening to Rio again after reading your book, because now I hear things that I didn't hear before.
Excellent, interesting.
Like the beginning of Rio, and what they were. I forget what the weird sound effect they do at the very beginning. Didn't they play something backwards after they hit it on the?
They dropped like rods on a piano, and then they, like flipped the tape over, and did it backwards. And you're right. Like when you're like, okay, that's how it came together. And then when you hear the song, you're like, oh, of course. But it's so, it's one of those things, I think for Rio, especially, you take it for granted,
right?
Because it's probably a song that, you've heard a million times.
Right. But you hear every song differently after reading the book. So I guess on that note, congratulations. I mean, I hear this is an idea that you had, or that you first pitched back in 2007.
That's correct. And it's funny. I for years and years and years, I've been, talking, I want to do this book. I want to do this book. And the funny thing is that I have all of these people I've known for a while. They're like, yeah, you told me about that. So apparently I've told a lot of people like back that I wanted to do this, but I was digging in an old email address I don't use anymore. And I found my pitch from 2007, because I knew I pitched it in 2009, because I met my husband around that time. And when he met, he was like, yeah, when we first met, you just kept talking about pitching this book. So, but I was like, wow, I did it again. So yeah, I've wanted to write this book for a very long time.
How old were you, or what was your entry point into Duran Duran growing up?
So my entry point first was kind of the wedding album. I really started getting into, obviously I liked music in the 80s. But then, I really started watching MTV pretty heavily and listening to the radio pretty heavily. I grew up in Cleveland, and we had a really, really great alternative rock station that came in. I think it was 92 or 93 that it started. And so they played a ton of Duran Duran. And so we had all of the wedding album singles, including Too Much Information, which got a lot of airplay in Cleveland, I believe. And so that was sort of my entry point. But at the same time, all of those stations were doing flashback lunches and retro weekends and things like that. So Duran Duran, of course, was part of that. And so, it was kind of interesting, because I think I came to both eras of the band at around the same time, more or less.
That's interesting, because my entry point is probably Seven and the Ragged Tiger. Because I don't like you point out in your book, they hadn't caught on really until 83.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And that's what's so interesting, is that when I actually sat down and researched and kind of, triangulated different dates, it was like this like really compressed, like 1983 was like the pivotal year for them. I think in America, especially because Rio finally caught on, and then they had their debut finally caught on at the end of the year. Seven and the Ragged Tiger caught on. And so it was just this, like, everything all at once was sort of happening for the band with like many different eras. So yeah, the start of the year, Hungry Like the Wolf, and by the end of the year, Union of the Snake was a hit. It was like, which, sound pretty different. You see how fast their progression was at that point.
It's strange, because you think back to that time, or I think back to that time, and I was in high school, and you think, wow, I was always a Duran Duran fan from the start. And then you realize, no, you really weren't. They were around long before, you saw them on MTV, and you may be one of the first million fans, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's really funny, because it's true. Like, I got an email from somebody who was like, yeah, I've been a fan since the late 70s. And so like, and I wasn't entirely, he was like, yeah, I think I saw them. And so I was like, wow, so you saw the Birmingham era too. And so I'm like, do I know you? Because their email address had looked like it was sort of, it was Duran Duran related, but I'm like, but yeah, I mean, it's so funny to think that they were popular in England. I mean, their first record took off in England. They were everywhere, in England and Australia, and in America, they were basically kind of a, underground dance club hit, and Girls on Film, because it was so salacious, that got them attention. But they were just sort of this weird band that didn't fit in anywhere in what was going on in America at that point.
It's also interesting that one of their very first lead singers, I guess really before they became Duran Duran, was Andy Wickett. And he was the first person we ever interviewed on the Stuck in 80s podcast.
Whoa.
And that was back in 2005, maybe early 2006. And when I saw you reference him in the book, I thought, oh my God, she's really dug way deep. And then as I'm going through the notes at the end, which I don't normally do, but I was just so amazed by all the sources, and I got down to the S's, and I couldn't believe that somehow you had uncovered the blog item I had written about Andy.
I think I had to go on the Internet Archive for that. Actually,
you did. I would be afraid to go back and listen to that interview. It was one of the first that we did, and I remember feeling nauseous the night before.
Yeah, no, I mean, and gosh, when I started doing interviews, as a journalist, I was always I still get nervous before every interview.
So what led you to pick Rio? So as the album to profile in your book, what about that album in particular? I mean, you entered Duran Duran's orbit a lot later than that.
I mean, Rio was one of the records. I mean, when I first started getting into Duran Duran in the 90s, Rio was one of the records I reached to. I think I took Rio out of my public library on CD. Because I think for whatever reason, I remember the CD was hard to find, or else because I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of money for buying records. And so I taped it. And so that was a record I've always loved. And then I kind of found that it had a really good backstory. I mean, as we were kind of alluding to earlier, the record took a while to pick up in the US. It was definitely not an immediate hit. And so I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. There's a good story potentially why. It took off because Hungry Like the Wolf became a hit, but that took a while to take off. So I'm just like, that's very interesting. That's kind of, because now I think, people are like, oh, Duran Duran, they're so popular. They've sold millions of records, but it didn't happen right away. So I thought always that was really interesting. And the record itself musically is just so rich. I mean, obviously everyone knows the singles and everyone knows the hits, but every song on the record is good. Every song on the record could have been a single. And so I just knew, and then it's held up so well too. It's one of those records that over the years I'd listen to and new things would kind of pop out. And as I, grew up, I related to it in different ways. And so I'm like, this is kind of one of those totemic records that just really, is really a touchstone of the 80s. And so, I mean, those are kind of the main reasons, but there's so many. I just, and the artwork, how did I forget the artwork and the music videos? But there's so many things.
You make one point very strongly in the book, and that is that the band's idea up front was to combine the sounds of Chic and the Sex Pistols, or more generally combining glam rock, punk rock, and disco. And I think, to me, Rio is the one album that they've ever done that shows that sound idea straight up front.
That's really interesting. I think I would kind of agree with that. And I think, the first record, I was actually listening to some bootlegs before we got on Zoom here from kind of the first album. And, it was, from their European tours from early 81. And it was really interesting hearing and how quickly they kind of evolved from that. But yeah, I mean, obviously I think they really nailed the dance version, the Chic kind of version of everything really pretty early on. They loved, the extended remixes, and, when you listen to back now, you're like, yeah, they were a real shit hot live band, part of my French. But the Sex Pistols thing, in terms of, we're just going to do things our way. We're going to kind of rip up the playbook. We're going to, basically do whatever we want and kind of take what had been done before and piece it all together into something new. They did that on Rio. And that very, very, very much comes out. And I think that came out more when I, as I was listening to it and putting the book together, for sure.
How long does it take to do? I mean, once you kind of had the green light to research the book and write it, and did everyone that you approached cooperate eagerly on the project?
So I'm trying to think. So I found out I proposed the book in like fall 2018, and I found out in very early 2019 that it was taken, and I think the proposal went public in like March or something like that. And so I mean, the first thing, once the news came out there, I think my first basically email call was to the band. I wanted to see and hope and say, hey, I would love to, interview you guys for it. Obviously they've talked about Rio so much over the years, but I wanted to kind of try to get some fresh interviews with some fresh perspective. And yeah, they were completely down. I was really, really gratified by that, especially because, they don't have to do that. I mean, they're such a forward thinking band, and they're a band that's always kind of moving forward, and, asking someone, hey, can you talk about a record you made nearly 40 years ago? I could completely see how that would get tiresome. And so I was really, really gratified that they agreed to talk. So I talked to John, Roger, and Nick, and then, I just started kind of reaching out to people elsewhere. I wanted to talk to Malcolm Garrett, the graphic designer who worked so closely with Duran Duran early in their career, especially on Rio. I talked to Andy Earl, who did the iconic photo in the Rio liner notes. And I talked to Andy Hamilton, who did the sax solo on Rio. I mean, and honestly, everyone was completely down. It was very, because you never expect that, as a journalist, you always reach out to people. I mean, there were some people I tried to get in touch with. I couldn't, I wanted to talk to Anthony Price, because obviously those suits are just so
sure, yeah,
amazing. And I tried to, I did some Googling and tried some email addresses, and I didn't end up being able to, I sent a couple of messages and didn't end up, maybe I had the wrong email, who knows, but things like that. But for the most part, a lot of people I approached said yes. I mean, I think I did over 50 interviews for the book, and I think about over 40 ended up in there. And so, I mean, which is amazing. I think that's a real testament to how special this record is and how much it meant to so many people too.
What things did you find during those interviews that really blew your mind?
Oh man, so many things. It was really gratifying. So Andy Earl kind of explained how he got the photo of the band. And I think that was, he was this, he did if people know, he did one of Duran Duran's earlier photo shoots. If any of the photos you see of them near kind of like fake palm trees where they're kind of looking kind of space age, like in a mall, like that was him. And so he kind of returned basically for the Rio shoot. They went on top of a building, and he had to deal with lights going on and off, and it was cold. And so he kind of put together all these photos together. So just hearing kind of how, I mean, I love hearing stuff like that anyway. I love hearing how, different creative things came together. And so that was really cool to hear kind of how that happened. I really love talking to Malcolm Garrett, who is just a complete genius in terms of how he approaches graphic design. He also worked with Buzzcocks and Magazine. It was just really instrumental in kind of putting together the look and aesthetic of so many of the British bands of the late 70s and early 80s. And just hearing what he did with Duran Duran too was just really, really mind-blowing. He really understood what the band was going for, and then how he kind of put together the Rio sleeve and modeling after a cigar box, and how he was just thinking in that was just, because it was really cool. I mean, I've seen, looked at that photo for, years, and I see it in a completely new way now. And, and that was kind of a common theme, I think, in general. I'm talking to the band members too, Nick saying that the Rio sax solo was planned, and just hearing about, how meticulous everyone was, and, and how they just didn't stop. They just really were so driven creatively at that point, and all that went into it. And so that was really cool, hearing all that stuff too.
I thought it was interesting where you had the story about Andy Hamilton, the sax player, where he kind of went off on his own one time while he was playing his solo, and the band got mad at him because it's like, play it the way we wrote it, play it the way we recorded it the first time.
And I should say he said it very laughingly. It was very affable. He wasn't like, oh, they were so angry at me, but he was like, okay, this is how they want us to do it, and so, because it's, you think about it. I mean, anyone, you hear Rio so many times. It's one of those iconic sax solos, and that you see live bootlegs of the band too. And he played with the band, he toured with them, and so he's doing the solo, and you don't think that, oh yeah, it's the same every time or pretty close to the same. That's by design. You don't even think about that. Because I think some bands, are like, yeah, go for it. They'll have people kind of improvise. And, that was such an integral part of the song. That really speaks to just how, meticulous and well thought out Rio was, and how Duran Duran was very meticulous as well, as musicians around that time.
In 2010, All You Need Is Now came out, and all the buzz about that album at the time was, this is the sequel to Rio, is what I kept hearing over and over again by people. Did you agree with that assessment?
It's funny because the record just turned like
11,
10, and so or 11, and so I was like, what, I'm going to revisit this and test out that theory. And in many ways, I don't think I can see both sides of the coin. For starters, I think it definitely is more stripped down. It's very stripped down in a way that Rio is. When you listen to Rio, there's not, some of the Duran Duran records that they came after that were very, very dense and layered and things like that. And Rio is definitely, everybody's kind of playing their part. And there's some like cool little, different things overdubbed here and there, but it's a pretty straightforward record. And I think All You Need Is Now in that sense is. I think it's also very compact. They definitely kind of took the poppier spirit of Rio, or at least, Rio's poppier sides, and kind of grafted that to that. And the lyrical callbacks too. I think, the man who stole a leopard, was the pair to the chauffeur. And so I think it's very subtle, but I think the thing that really struck me in doing this book, and then really kind of surveying Duran Duran's entire catalog, is they've never made the same record twice. Every record has been something different. Some of them have been more successful than others, but they've always been trying to push themselves forward. I mean, I think working with Mark Ronson, who was such a fan of the band, he on All You Need Is Now, he was so good about, kind of drawing things out of the band, maybe they, different sounds and things like that. And so it's pretty close, but I think, it's still like, wow, this sounds like Duran Duran in the year 2010. And so I think it sounds very contemporary too, which is a really, really kind of good balance.
What effect do you think Andy Taylor's departure had on the band and their sound? I mean, I think if you look at All You Need Is Now and you listen to Rio, the one thing you're missing is an Andy Taylor guitar, contribution. I mean, his departure, I mean, did that spin the band off in a different direction, you think?
I mean, I think when any band has a lineup change, I think there are going to be differences. And, in Duran Duran, obviously when Andy left, Warren Cucurullo was in the band for a while. And, when you listen, I was listening to their catalog with guitar in mind. I'm like, yeah, Warren was such a rocker. I mean, he had Missing Persons and Frank Zappa. And so he even brought kind of different influences than Andy. I think what's really interesting is all the guitarists that Duran Duran have worked with have brought something different to the table. I mean, Andy was basically, a rocker who had been on tour in the 70s. He loved all the classic guitarists, Keith Richards and Jeff Beck and things like that. And so he was definitely, and he had a much more, and I think they even say it in the book, the band members were like, he had definitely songwriting and playing skills that we didn't have at that point. And Warren was different. Warren was definitely kind of like the definite swaggering rock star type. But, they work with Don Brown, though, on All You Need Is Now, who is a really fantastic guitarist. He's just a different player. He's a kind of a more, thoughtful player, kind of deliberate player. And he's definitely, studied in that sense. I think he's been doing a bunch of shows as well and kind of influenced by Pink Floyd, maybe a little bit more atmospheric. And so I think it's just different. I think that he's kind of helped at that point in Duran Duran's career. He really kind of helped push them forward. I mean, to me, he seems like the best guitarist for that album, just because he really kind of, preserves sort of the, rock element that they've always kind of had, but also kind of pushed it in a more nuanced direction, maybe, just because like his dad was in music and stuff too.
When they reunited with the original lineup, what was it, 2006 or 2000?
It was earlier than that. Like it was
1999,
early 2000s. Then they kind of, the tour kind of rolled out over the world, I think, in the first like half the decade. Yeah.
What was your thought when that happened? Did you think, okay, Andy's back, they've they see that they have a winning formula here. This is going to stick around for a while. Or did you kind of see that as okay, this is sort of almost a guest appearance of sorts?
It's funny. I saw them twice on the reunion tour, and I don't think it registered that he was back, but I don't remember having any deep thoughts about that. I think at the time, I think I was just I hadn't been able to see Duran Duran for like a half decade because they didn't come. I was living in Boston, and they didn't come to where I could get to the show. So honestly, I was just really happy I was able to see them. It didn't really kind of strike me until later, like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I got to see kind of the reunion. And I think that was just more, where the reunion tour happened when I was kind of switching jobs and moving and things like that. So I think I was a little harried that year. But I saw them at least, so I didn't really have any deep thoughts on it. It was only in hindsight where I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, I'm really glad that they were able to kind of have that reunion and make the record and tour together. Cause it was just, you could tell that the joy they were having on stage at that point, especially too, when you kind of go back and look at kind of the bootlegs and the video bootlegs that have kind of come out with that. It was neat. All the stars kind of aligned at that point.
I have the DVD of that tour, and I've probably watched it so many times that even my DVD player is getting a little tired of it. I'm hoping they'll tour now that they have a new album coming out. So I have to ask you, what do you think of the new single "Invisible"? I really like the single, honestly. We were like out and about, and the snippet came, and I was just like, that sounds really cool. It immediately stuck in my head. I'm like, well, okay, that's a really good sign, because you never know with that stuff, in terms of, you hear a snippet of a single and that doesn't really tell you much. So I was like, all right, cool. So it came out, and then I heard the entire song. I was like, wow. I mean, I should say that I'm a huge Blur fan. Like in the 90s, I love Blur. And so that Graham Coxon from Blur is on the record is just such a thrill to me, because he's another really interesting guitar player that brings different influences. I think he's influenced by Wire and Pavement and all sorts of different bands, depending on kind of what project he's working on. But I like it. It harkens back to me kind of the later 80s records, like Notorious and Big Thing, but it really has kind of a contemporary sort of arrangement and sort of a contemporary sheen to it, but in a way that sounds natural. I think a lot of times when bands are trying to, veteran bands are trying to sound modern or contemporary, it just doesn't come across very well. You're just like, oh, you're trying too hard. But this sounds completely natural. It sounds like a logical progression from Paper Gods, and just really, I think, worked out pretty well. When you can even say my name as the memory gone, are you feeling now? Go on, call my name. I can't play this game, so I ask again. Will you say my name? Has the memory gone? Are you feeling numb? Or have I become invisible? Isn't it the most Duran Duran thing ever that they had an AI bot named Huxley dream up the idea for the video? I know. I love it. The video is so creepy and so disorienting, but it's perfect for the song. But I was just like, man, I love that. They're always forward thinking. They're always trying to, push things forward and try new things. And, so it's so very in character. So yeah, no, I love that. They would never say, hey, let's go back to Sri Lanka and do another video with the elephants. And right. Exactly. It just would never do that. No, they're always moving forward. They're always like, let's keep trying something new. I mean, that's when you talk about like artists and creatives, like that's them to a T. That's kind of their I think their punk roots coming in too. As punks, I think they were railing against nostalgia. That's what original punk rock was. And they're like, yeah, no, we're gonna keep moving forward and ripping things up and kind of push ourselves forward. Here's $1 million question for you. I'm sure you've been asked this before. Uh-huh. Why hasn't Duran Duran been nominated for the Rock Hall of Fame? I knew you were going to ask me that. I think is the question that I've been asked the most in this press cycle. I'm not kidding. I think part of it is that I know I touch on this in the book, but they've always had that stigma. A lot of people thought, oh, they're just a boy band, or oh, they're just a prefab pop band. Or they're just a video band. That was the big kind of, that's how they were billed, on so many articles in like 1984. And when they toured America, it was, oh, the video band, Duran Duran.
And so people just thought that they didn't have any substance. And I think a lot of it is that, and I think a lot of it is that their fan base, there were a lot of teen girls who liked them. And, and there are fewer people and classes of people who have their tastes maligned more than teen girls, so I think a lot of people were just skeptical. And so I think that has a lot to do with it, which is unfair. I mean, when you talk about influence, when you talk about impact, when you talk about, just quality of catalog, Duran Duran absolutely belongs in the Rock Hall, like 1000%. And I've heard a lot more chatter recently, I think in the recent years about that. So cross fingers, hopefully everyone will come around to everyone's way of thinking and say, no, Duran Duran need to be in there.
So what big project are you working on next?
So I'm working on, I'm currently in the midst actually of a book on the B-52s for University of Texas Press. So just kind of looking at their cultural impact and their sort of career and things like that. So that's kind of the biggest thing, and just continuing to promote the Rio book, because it's coming out the release date in England and Australia is a little bit delayed. It's July 1st. So I'm doing some press for that too. And just, going on podcasts and just, talking about Duran Duran. It's not bad. There are worse things you could have to talk about.
So there's a traditional question I always like to end an interview with, and hopefully it won't stump you too much. We like to think that here at Stuck in the 80s, we have a podcast time machine, and that we can offer you a seat on the time machine, and you can use it to go back to one event or one period in time and either fix something you did wrong or relive an event, or however you choose to use it. How would you choose to use your podcast time machine seat?
Man, can I use the podcast to go to something I didn't do?
Yes, absolutely.
See, yes. I wish I had a time machine so I could go back and see Duran Duran in 1984 in America, because listening to the bootlegs and, like in Madison Square Garden, the energy and the excitement that's there is just, it's like you get, even like streaming something on YouTube, just the goosebumps are there. Like there's just so much energy and so much excitement. And, like I said, I've seen the band a bunch of times. I've seen it a ton of times. And every time it's joyous and exuberant. But there was just something about that time period that I'm just like, I would love to do that. If I could hop in my time machine, that's what I would choose.
As you're telling me that story, I'm sitting here staring at my copy of Sing Blue Silver, the DVD, the tour documentary of 1984.
I'm looking across mine too. I have it. I'm in my husband's music room, and I'm looking at a copy as well.
Yeah. I had tickets to go see that with my girlfriend at the time, and my mom vetoed it at the last minute because she didn't care for my girlfriend who smoked.
What? That is not cool, Mom.
So I think I might use my time machine to go back and let you tell my mom that, because I still feel like I was robbed big time on that one.
I'd be happy to. I would be very persuasive. I would be like, Mom, like, you have to do this. Like, absolutely. That's so sad.
You have one of the best answers I've ever heard. So.
Well, good. Excellent.
Hey, Annie, thanks for doing this. This has been an interview I've really been looking forward to.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you having me on. This has been fun. Thank you.
That's our interview with Annie Zaleski. It was a fun time. We chatted for a great deal after we stopped recording. She's a really exceptional writer, and I really enjoyed the book. I ripped through it in like a day and a half.
Like I said, they are fun to read because you're like learning something about your favorite albums.
The key is, though, read the book and then go and listen to the album again. It's like you're listening to it for the first time. You hear things that you didn't hear before.
Huh.
So especially with Rio, really impressed that she did more than 50 interviews for the book. Crazy that it's an idea that she first thought about back in 2007. And ultimately she's right. Duran Duran is a band that's always moving forward and never making the same album twice.
They're a musical shark, Steve. They got to keep moving, or they did.
You know what else needs to keep moving?
The Seggies.
Prepare to qualify.
The
You can always just go with my fallback tuneful stylings.
The tuneful stylings of Stuck in the Arcade. It's our brand new Segi here at Stuck in the 80s. We will play a snippet of an arcade sound from the 80s. If you get it right, you're entered into the drawing for a, say it with me, people, postal-friendly bottle opener. I don't care what state I'm recording in. That just comes out smooth every time. We really are like 5 miles apart. We could have done this in person.
Yeah, then I have to walk over there or take the subway or get a cab. I don't know,
take the queue. I know for a fact that so tomorrow, which will be like 5 days previously by the time you guys listen to this, me and future wife are going to Times Square to visit Brad, and we'll be taking the Q train. So
yeah. So wait a minute. That means we did build a podcast time machine because you're listening to this and we're describing something that is yet to happen. But by the time you hear it, it will have happened.
Right.
That's heavy, Doc.
If at the end of the podcast a telegram shows up, I don't really
pay the man.
Just pay the man.
And it starts raining, and we're stuck in 1887. Just leave us there, okay?
That's the weird thing about the weather here versus Florida. I mean, in New York, it'll rain all day. In Florida, it rains for like an hour and then it stops, or a half hour.
I got rained on yesterday. I wasn't quite ready for it. I have to say, I had to bust out the jacket in a big fat hurry.
Jeez, I don't even have a raincoat or an umbrella here. So if it rains, I'm just like, well, I'll just order delivery. We came up here because I was heading to New England to meet the in-laws, the future in-laws. I hadn't met, I'd met her mom's side of the family, but I hadn't met the other side of the family. So we went to Maine. We saw Jen with one N. That was fun.
Nice.
We had lobster rolls and fried clam strips with her.
I hear lobster rolls are kind of spendy right now, that there's a bit of a shortage.
Yeah, they were. But the fun thing was, and I say this with all sarcasm, they rented an entertainer for this party. It was a modest little party, maybe 20 of us outdoors, because the temperature is about 65 degrees in Maine.
Oh, very pleasant.
And so this guy gets up wearing a leather jacket and has a boombox, and his name is Paco. And he's not Hispanic, but his name is Paco. And he proceeds to sing all these hits from the 50s and 60s for 2 or 3 hours. It was a very special afternoon. I mean, guy had he had a heart of gold. I'll just say that. But it was an interesting day in the sun. And I didn't realize ticks are a problem in Maine either. I don't think I got bit by one, but when Jen was describing the problem, I got to admit, I haven't stopped scratching.
Start to get the willies, don't you?
Yeah. But anyway, so that's first trip to New England. I didn't even have a lobster roll. For me, that's like, I am with seafood. I'm kind of like, I don't really get it. I mean, I like seafood.
You don't like the ocean going spider type stuff. So lobsters and crabs, you're just not down with it.
I'm okay with it. It's just when you turn it into
I've heard the horrible things you've said about crab cakes.
Bologna sandwich of the sea.
Yeah.
I stand by that.
I'm not going to argue with your opinion on that, but that's just like your opinion, man.
Okay, we were here to do a Segi.
That's right, we were.
From way back in episode 600, here was the Mystery Arcade sound. That's from the game Phoenix, which I have no recollection of, which makes me want to punch Brad and the Wolf Nards, but that's okay.
Why? Just because I knew it and you didn't. I mean, I picked this sound effect, so I just went to one of my old favorites.
Tell me what happens in Phoenix.
It's like your basic space shooter. You've got there's a phase where you've got these eggs that are coming down on you. If you don't shoot them fast enough, they hatch into these big pterodactyls and they try and kill you. And then there's this like big massive thing that you have to kind of do, like it's like a breakout kind of game where you have to shoot out the ship underneath it so that then you can get the boss before it comes down and kills you. It kind of alternates back and forth. So
let me get this right. You like Spaceship arcade games. you detest spaceship music videos.
No. I do not detest spaceship music videos. I think they're fun, and I'm making a list of them so that I can create my next podcast, spaceship videos of the 80s.
Yeah. We actually got some suggestions via email on that. Did you notice that?
We did. Yeah.
That was fun. Anyway, we did have some winners who don't want to punch Brad in the wolf nards. I don't know why I like saying that, though. It's just fun. I'm weird. I think I have tick poisoning. I don't know. I've had far too much
poisoning. It was tick poisoning.
It was? Yes. So poisoning.
It was a weird 4 days. So take a half breath and read the winners.
Okay, here we go. Winners this week include Tom Korn in Austria, Buck from Wally World, Dallas in St. Joe, Missouri, James Crabtree in Indianapolis, Brian in San Francisco, Ron Rubik from the Kentucky Derby, I think that's what he meant by that, and East Coast Alex, who writes, yet another game I loved and sucked at.
What game were you really good at? What was was it Defender? Or no, it was
Defender
Joust.
had way too many. Defender had way too many buttons. No, the only game I would say that I had an even modest skill at was I was pretty good at Tempest, and I was pretty good at Galaga 3. Played a lot of Galaga 3. Oh my gosh.
For those who don't know, we have a Facebook page for the podcast. It's facebook.com/stuckinthe80s podcast. And I put a meme up there today about if, hypothetically speaking, you win an arcade sweepstakes and you get your pick of any arcade game from the 80s to have it home. Yeah, no quarters needed. What do you pick? And a lot of people picked Galaga and Pac-Man. So what would you pick?
I don't want to steal your answer. I think you should go first.
I go back and forth between Tron, the stand-up version, which I know is sacrilege, but that's the version that I played.
No, it isn't.
Or there was another one called Zaxxon that I was really good at.
Oh, the isometric. Yeah, that's the isometric view. That's how I remember it. What a dork.
I mean, Galaga is kind of like you could play Galaga for free on your computer. So it's like I don't need to. So what would you pick?
Do you remember the Star Trek arcade game where you would kind of warp around and like try and kill Klingons? 7 Klingons in this sector, and you'd zip over there and they try and kill you, and you try and kill them. That was pretty fun. And then there was a sit-down cabinet, and there was a sit-down version of a stand-up one.
There was a good version. There was a Star Wars game that was out for a while. Do you remember that one where you skim along?
The vector graphics one. That was good too.
Yeah. Can I have 3 picks?
You always go shoot the thing. Yeah.
If you're not following us on Facebook, please do. I'm trying to be better now about asking these kind of fun little questions during the week. Somebody's answer today was none of them. I would just pick the most expensive one, sell it, buy a gun, and then go hunting.
Okay.
And I just wrote back saying, I think you're on the wrong page. So that was it. So
that's funny.
Anyway, speaking of on the wrong page, total.
Is it time for me to spin the wheel?
Yeah, spin the wheel.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, that was unnecessary.
I disagree.
Okay, it's going to land on East Coast Alex. You are this week's winner. So email us your postal address and then go out there every single day and wait.
Sit by the mailbox
until the postal friendly bottle opener shows up. What's your take on you've been in New York for what, a couple of weeks now?
Well, I was here last week and I'm back this week. So
what's your favorite part about when you're in New York for an extended period of time?
I like walking around. I just like walking around. And the thing is right now, the city's still a little quiet. Wouldn't you agree?
We're over on the Upper East Side and it's pretty close to normal.
It's coming back, but it's a little quiet. Well, and I mean, okay, yes, I'm standing right near Times Square, which is kind of a, bananagrams in the best of times. And it's not like the full-on Times Square experience. But I will say I did see Minnie Mouse with her head off smoking a cigarette the other day. So I think we're pretty close to normal.
The problem with where you are right now is that Broadway hasn't reopened yet.
Right. So like my favorite pizza place is right around the corner here. They're like, we're not opening until Broadway starts back up again.
Exactly.
I need pizza.
So because they announced today that in New York and I think in California, they were getting rid of all the COVID restrictions as long as you're fully vaccinated.
Yeah.
So where we are, if it seems kind of normal, like you can walk outside, you can walk the dog without your mask on, which is nice.
Right. Yeah. If you're vaccinated. Yeah. So,
but if you go,
yeah, I've been having that same experience. Sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
The thing, I just like the tap water. That's where I live in Florida. We have the worst tap water.
Oh yeah.
It's like the stuff that like you just cooked a bunch of eggs and you're just draining the grease into the sink. And when you come up here, it's like water cooler quality.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
My water drinkage goes through the roof. Anyway, I'm sure people are really fascinated by this at home. So instead of us continuing to blather on, pay attention. Here's this week's Mystery Arcade sound. If you know it, email us at podcast@sid80s.com and tune in soon to find out if we're still up here in New York or if we're back home. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
At the Video Palace, you'll find Duran Duran. The complete video album, from Planet Earth to Is There Something I Should Know? 2 years of Duran Duran videos in a 1-hour video cassette at the Video Palace in Kensington.
Hey, we're back. Got a couple minutes left. Time to thank our new patron, Michelle Foster, became a patron this week. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, very generous.
We had one of the benefits of being a patron is we do these monthly happy hours. You know, some people drink during them, some people don't, and they last about an hour. And I think the theme of the last happy hour was summer jobs. So people told their summer jobs of the 80s stories, and it was fun. But somehow it just got off into a bunch of Randy storytelling that we will not discuss any further, other than to say pictures were shared and promptly deleted. And
it's hard to keep a group that big on task. Let's face it, and that's not really what it's about. We're not there to quiz you. It's just need a little starter for the conversation, and then it kind of rolls on its own. Yeah,
it was fun because Chase Squires, who you guys might remember, he was one of the hosts in the very, very early days. If he's on the call, it's always fun because he's always enjoying a drink or two. And
basic raconteur.
Yeah, so things can go in all different directions. We really enjoy it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Annie Zaleski. Her book is out. You can find it on Amazon. You can get the Kindle version. That's what I had. And seriously, to check it out. It is a fun read, and it'll make you completely rethink what you know about Duran Duran and their Rio album. We'll be back in a couple weeks. But in the meantime, Brad and I remain here, along with the boys of Duran Duran, hopelessly stuck in the 80s.
Stuck in the 80s is now on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/stuckinthe80spodcast. Special thanks to Check Battery Daily for our theme music, and thanks for listening.